A very warm welcome to our panel, Women's Roles in Religion Today and its Media Portrayal, which is a part of the I Belong conference on feminism by the Goethe-Institut and DW Academy. Firstly, I would like to say that I'm very excited to have you three here, and I can't wait to know all that you've done and all that you've been doing all this while. The first question that I would want to leave out there, and if you'd please take turns to answer it, would be really nice. I don't really want to push anyone into the zone. I would like to know more about you three. Like, I would like it if you could introduce yourself and mostly what your work focuses on and where you are right now. If you're not okay with disclosing that, that's fine as well. And why have you agreed to be on this panel and speak to me? Mukta, do you want to go first, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. I'm just thinking why I wanted to talk to you that part. Yeah. So I'm Mukta Chakma Shathi. I belong to Chakma indigenous community in Bangladesh, and I'm from Chittagong Hill Tracts, which were a conflict zone and faced more than 20 years of armed conflict. In paper, since 1997, we are in the peace arena, but which never happens, you know, when the peace accord is signed, it never, once it's broken, it's broken. So I'm from that area. My family has a long history of being indigenous political activists. So I grew up in a political environment, and I find out my ways as indigenous activist first. Later on, I became feminist, and that was sort of eye-opening for me because I was very much involved in the indigenous rights movement. And I just saw that how the indigenous women's issues are always being sidelined or pushed back. And from there, I became a feminist. Right now, I am working as a senior indigenous fellow with the Office of Human Rights of United Nations in Geneva. I am also Voice technical lead. Voice is an platform that works in many countries of the world, and we specifically work in the conflict zone. I sometimes work as a researcher, and I love to introduce myself as a feminist researcher. On your second question, Shudeshna, that why today I agreed to talk to you, I think one of the biggest point is this year, very intentionally, I'm avoiding to be a part of the International Women's Day Symposium, seminar, and everything. And one of the reason behind is that every year around 8 March, suddenly there are so many, panels, award recognition is happening, which I find problematic. And secondly, most of the organization, doesn't matter it's a rights organization or a corporate organization, they sort of expect that the women will be in the panel because it's for their interest. It's talking about their issue. So I was avoiding all the calls, but with you, I think I just agreed because I felt like it is not putting me in the box. I have been always put in the box as a indigenous person. It's not like that. That is one of the reasons. And the other reason is how the organizers are recognizing our time and expertise, which we are putting on the board, on the table of today's discussion. Yeah, I think that's why I agree. And obviously for you.
Farah, would you like to go next?
Hi, so I'm delighted to be here and to be part of this conversation. My name is Farah Naqvi. I'm an activist and a writer based in Delhi, in India. And I have been engaged both as an activist and a writer with a range of issues to do with equality, furthering democracy, specifically around the rights of women. So I've been active in the women's movement in India, which is of course an amorphous and very large, very diverse movement, but I consider myself a very card-carrying member of that movement in all its diversities and with all its problems for the last 30 odd years. Have worked with Dalit women, have worked with minorities, increasingly now with the rights of Muslims, which is hugely under attack in the India of today, all the way from the issues of education to democratic rights, to equity, to access, to development, and of course, justice. And the battle lines have now begun to shift. So over the last 6 or 7 years, there is a conscious attempt to demonize Muslims entirely. There is cultural erasure on the cards, and there is extreme cases of violence. There have been lynching. There's been a kind of labeling and targeting, and all of that is part of my agenda today. In my work, in my writing, is to push back against all of this. And honestly, to be part of a panel like this, it's actually not much of a brainer, because unless, and I think this is something that bears repeating again and again, which is that unless the world and each of the countries that we are sitting in or we work for, the societies, unless we engage frontally with issues of identity, we simply cannot further goals of equality in a democratic framework, because the identity is not something that one does for belly button gazing. I mean, yes, of course, it can be an intellectual and interesting exercise, but structural identities carry power. And unless we are willing to engage with the structures of power that are determined entirely around who you are, where you come from, what communities you belong to, and unless we can dent, demolish, reverse the entire structure of inequity, which is structured around different kinds of identities, including some of the identities that you will invoke in today's panel or perhaps in your larger conference, which is, of course, identities as women, but equally identities of community, of religion, of markers, of a certain kind of labeling, and all of that carries power. And so unless we engage frontally with identity, we cannot dent inequality. And so I think identity conversations, but they are uncomfortable conversations, because those who tend to hold the platforms, who control the platforms, who control the mics, tend to be people who are constructed as quote unquote without identity. So somebody who is from a Chakma background has an identity. Huda has an identity. I have an identity. But in the India that I belong to, if you're an upper caste mainstream Hindu, then you are, in a sense, so's identity. It's very much like the construction in, say, America of, there are people of color, which is the Blacks, which is Hispanics, which is Mexicans. And I'm like, so the others are what? Colorless. And it is the colorless that do not shine the spotlight enough on their identities, because that is the default identity of power and of structural privilege. And so identity conversations that include me and anybody who is a holder of privilege and power are equally important if we're to shift that balance of power, which is what we're all about. And shifting a balance of power means, of course, equal access to all the fruits of democracy, of the goods and services of a nation, but equally equal access to the power to construct images, the power of the media, the power to determine whose image is seen as regressive, which community is seen as backward, and therefore who gets the reins of control in policy making nationally and globally. So identity conversations to me are absolutely vital in our world and in our respective societies, which is why I have agreed with great pleasure to be part of this conversation.
I'm so glad that you are here, because I think to some extent, definitely we all will find common ground in our experiences, in our work. But I feel Muktashri and I would have already related to whatever you have said to our struggles. Muktashri more, but with me, it has been no less. I'm looking forward to the next question, but before that, I would love to hear from Huda.
Hello, everyone. What an honor to be here with you today. It's such a wonderful space created. I thank you for the organizers for making this space happen. I live in the UK. My name is Huda. I live in London. I am born of Iraqi parents. I was born in Baghdad. I traveled throughout the Middle East. Because of my identity, I am a Shia Muslim, so I am a minority within the majority Muslim community or civilization. We are also, because of the regime in Iraq at the time, we were political activists. My parents were political activists and had to flee Iraq because Saddam Hussein at the time decided that they should be sentenced to death. So that resulted us living across the Middle East and moving every few years because they would catch up with us and try and find us. And then we emigrated or sought asylum in the UK in 1988. And then I was 11 years old when I came to the UK. And increasingly my life has been shaped by politics, identity, religion, and my gender as a woman. From a very young age, I always kind of wanted to make sense of what was happening around me and why were people behaving in certain ways, why there was this kind of instability in life depending on which side of the fence you happen to fall upon. I came into my feminist consciousness with the birth of my son. He was born in 2008, and I kind of suddenly my world was turned upside down. What I had thought I was doing for the last couple of years, I had moved into the area of social justice work, and I've been working in non-governmental organizations since graduating, and so have, at the time thought reached the height of my career, and then to suddenly be told that because I have now become a mother, I am no longer equal, relevant, expert, committed, hungry enough, passionate enough for work, meant that I had to really examine the kind of privilege that I thought I had for a very long time. And that's set me on a trajectory of moving away from, I worked in politics and international relations and trying to kind of create a better understanding between the British establishment and its Muslim communities in the UK, because we had seen the rise in Islamophobia in Europe and particularly in the UK since 1988 with the publishing of the Satanic Verses, and then things took really a stronger trajectory with attacks on America on 9/11, and then since then things have been getting worse and worse for Muslims in Europe and the West under white supremacy, essentially, and the gendered experience of being a Muslim woman, identifiable Muslim woman in a white supremacy has been a very understudied and little understood phenomenon that many women have silently experienced in their thousands every day and continue to do so every day. And the intersection between seen as both needing of saving from your own faith and needing of being despised for choosing faith or being a Muslim woman is a really interesting way of living in the UK, but also the misogyny and patriarchy that you experience from your fellow community, from the men in your community, and how a lot of the prejudice and oppression that you face actually comes from a patriarchal understanding, both as a Muslim woman in Muslim communities, but also as a Muslim woman defending Muslim men most of the time. So that's a very interesting experience to live every day. And as a mother of two boys, you know, what is that like? How do I mediate all of these things? And the reason why I chose to be in this conversation is because of the very kind of topics around faith, feminism, and the media. And I think they're very, very important. And as I am the co-director of Musawa, the global movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family, it is to the heart of what we do. It is about us negotiating what Islamic feminism means and how it can change the realities for Muslim women on the ground, and how our aim is to change laws in the name of Islam that were written by men with patriarchy in mind, that uses and weaponizes our faith against us, and also plays into the hands of white supremacists and all those who have a disdain for Muslims and use religion as a reason why we should be erased, reformed, saved, and despised. So thank you for creating this space. I look forward to the discussion.
From what you all have said, I would like to just just pick out the majority, picking out which the regressive religion is, or the so-called liberals needing to save us, is something that I have also seen in the last couple of years, because my identity is that of a Hindu woman in Bangladesh who is a minority. So there are people who want to save me and my women, but half the time they wouldn't be knowing how they should be doing the saving. And they feel that only letting go or making sure that there are some erasure of some traditions is what is going to save us, is something that you've all pointed out. And that also creates the erasure of Hindu identities, right, in turn. And that is actually has happened over the years here. And not just for Hindu women, it's also the same for the indigenous communities, that our histories over the years have been erased, and now they're just passed on as folklore and nothing more, while those were the facts. Those are the facts. If we move on to the next part of our conversation, which is on identity politics and how it is often simplified, and when we simplify it, that is where the problem seeps in, that who we are as individuals in a community or a society is often decided by other people, sadly, and never are we asked who we are, who we identify as. And I feel that this putting an identity on us is also the political agenda that erases the conversation around who we want to be, and also erases the conversation around what the problem is. So in relation to religion and women, what role has media played or been playing over the last decades or in the past years? Yes, please, Farah.
You know, I think that before interrogating media, which is the very obvious fall guy, right? I think that given that this is a feminist conference, I think it is equally important to interrogate, and I'll be loose with my words here because, you know, of paucity of time, and we can have a more detailed conversation. I think that liberal feminist thought, more broadly speaking, has been equally culpable in assuming, somewhat patronizingly and infantilizing, all women of faith. And I think that there is a presumption, the secular presumption, if you will, that women of faith, because organized religion is seen to be a patriarchal construct, that therefore all women of faith are puppets, right? They have no agency. And I think the biggest pushback to that in India that we saw was, of course, women of faith, women wearing hijab on the streets during the protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act, right? We've seen that more recently in the pushback by young Muslim women on the hijab ban in Karnataka. Now, there are some feminists who are extremely uncomfortable with, oh my God, do we have to now support the hijab? Because that is a patriarchal construct. And of course, these girls are conditioned to accept the hijab when it is not a marker of emancipation, and so on and so forth. And I think that kind of infantilizing understanding of women's choices is equally part of, is what is also feeds into media narratives. And I think that this is a time, certainly in India, in the Indian context, for us to relook at how women choose to refashion the accoutrements of their faith. And by the way, this has nothing to do with whether you or I are believers or not. This is to do with adopting an accoutrement of what is seen as faith and using it as a tool in a battle against a government in a democracy. And I think that the presumption that these girls or these young women or the women out don't know what they are doing, or that they are conditioned falsely, is something that we need to interrogate. Because I find a very, very troubling double standard here. The feminist mantra, if you will, is, of course, let's interrogate all patriarchal institutions. And of course, the number one patriarchal institution to interrogate is the family, right? A family is a patriarchal construct. Families reproduce patriarchy on a daily basis. The very construction of marriage, of women, of the roles women bear, the gendered construction. And yet a great many of those who call themselves feminists participate in the family and are members of families and choose to put a very sharp feminist lens on what they see as organized religion, and to try and patronize and infantilize women of faith. So I think that is should be on the agenda in terms of thinking going forward. And I think certainly in India, we now have the triggers to do that. And from that flows, of course, how the media constructs not just women and religion, how the media constructs. Look, the media, I think that before we even begin a discussion about media and women and religion, we have to have that very fundamental discussion about what is media and whose media is it? And are we talking about the mainstream media? Are we talking about the alternative media? And to acknowledge and recognize, to start with, that what passes for media, in other words, the mainstream dominant, both global hegemonic and in the Indian context, the mainstream media is no longer a source of understanding or information, and that it is an extremely partisan power block. That is one among the many power blocks that one has to dismantle, essentially. So I think that we need to interrogate media, and I will let the others, I've spoken for too long, I will let the others come in on the issues with the media portrayal of women in religion, which, you know, I can speak endlessly about, but I will be democratic and yield the mic to my other wonderful co-panelists.
I think I will comment. I think one of the important points that Farah raised from many, I'm just picking, so that is that how there is, you know, maybe in a way like misunderstanding of women's right to choose, even though many feminists are vowing for that. And I remember having arguments with many of my senior feminist colleagues who were against the sex workers, you know, sex workers' rights, or who, because it's a patriarchal tool, that's how they see it. And then wearing heels, having tattoos, or dressing in a way which they think provocative and sort of like feed the patriarchy. But then I'm actually happy to see that those narratives are being challenged now. Many of the young feminists, they are marching with the high heels. Even if you look into, you know, many of the movements in Bangladesh, even there was a particular movement wearing high heels. The men were wearing high heels and were saying that, okay, let's walk in their shoes. And, you know, these are symbolic. I'm just saying that these are happening. And also now there is, you know, talk about the sex workers' right, how we include them. Well, I shouldn't say how we include them, how we also, you know, try to work with them in their own fight as an ally. I think that's important, and that is changing very slowly. Even that is going on with the LGBTQI movement as well now. You know, they were so much sidelined. Now we are sort of like trying to gather our power together. So that is one of the important things. I completely agree, and we need to look into those things. And the second thing about the media, I very much agree that what media we are talking about, because the conversation, I think, will also shift whether you are talking about only the national media or national and international media, you know, newspapers and others, or you are talking about alternative media. Because now, in the world that we live in, alternative media, blogs, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter plays a huge role. So I think we should also sort of explore that what media we want to focus on and how they are portraying our women, and whether they are portraying the way we want to be, or they are just picking our photos and picking our statement and then, you know, putting it in the narrative that they are comfortable with, or they want to pick a fight with us. So I think that's also another thing we need to discuss. Thank you, Sudeshna.
Yes, I think I agree. One of the things that is very clear, the need for an intersectional approach to feminism is more needed than ever. I think part of patriarchy is tactics, and sustainability is to divide and rule kind of the solidarity movements that exist between people calling for social justice and equality. I think, yes, the idea that, that's really important in the current debate around who's feminism and who's allowed to be called a feminist, and who speaks for feminism. I think that's really very important. I think also it's very clear how, women's choices are mediated by their fellow sisters as well. So it's not that, it is not, the mantra of choice is really dependent on, well, you can choose, but only if you choose what I like rather than what you choose, rather than what you like. And I think that's important. And it really illustrates to us how different historical moments in time and different lived experiences attach so much meaning to what we view as really important arguments in our fight and what important points in our fight. Hijab, for many people, as my sisters have rightly explained, is a symbol of oppression, because religion, organized religion, is deemed to be patriarchal. And there's no denying that the people who have been in charge of organized faith have been men for a very, very long time. And their interpretations, their norms, their point of view is what is central. It is the default. But that is the case with almost everything in society. Any law, any civic law, any kind of institution, any organization in society, finance, arts, culture, everything is mediated by patriarchy and decided by patriarchy.
Right.
And so the idea that we choose, we kind of boycott one thing as patriarchal is just does not take account of how embedded patriarchy is in every aspect of our lives. And I think what's really interesting from Musawa's point of view is deciding that these things that are used as tools of oppression against us, we will turn as tools of empowerment and liberation. And this is exactly what the project of Musawa has been, is to kind of try to say, as women who really believe in this idea of being divinely gifted the right to care and to sustain and to further develop the world that we find ourselves in. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a Muslim woman from a Muslim female point of view, rather than mediated through the knowledge that's created by men about ourselves, about our religion, about our relationship with the divine? And so that's what we've been doing, is deconstructing this knowledge, this kind of the norms, the ideas that say, Islam says X, Islam says Y. Well, who says Islam says this? Where did that come from? Who says that your understanding of God is mediated, is the only understanding that is enough and authentic or reliable? And then finally, related to that is the idea of mass communication through media. And my fellow panelists are absolutely right in terms of, you have your traditional media that has been in charge of the power has been in the hands of very few, usually men, who tell us what are important things that we should care about and learn about and fight or support. And then you have now, with the onset of social media, citizens becoming journalists and individuals deciding what is important to share, and life stories being shared as central and important. And so I think that's really, really interesting to see how, despite that, IT and communications continue to be created in the image of men, continue to serve men, in the sense that how the tools, the back end creation, the dissemination processes, who elevates certain media platforms, who pays for them, who controls them, who creates the programming behind all of these coding, and all of that is done by men. And are they done for women in mind, for an egalitarian approach, or are they then to maintain the status quo? So I think for me, the representation of women in mass culture, mediated through the processes of news and social media and newspapers and journalism has been that Muslim women have no choice. And if they choose, it's because either they're stupid or they've been brainwashed into doing things and not out of a place of real desire and agency. And we need to kind of tip the balance to say, I can take a tool like this cloth and turn it from a tool of oppression into an empowerment for many women, particularly in places where their Islamness is under attack. Our hijab becomes a political statement and a statement of defiance and a statement of reasserting our rights, not a tool of oppression that we have no choice. We have agency, we choose to wear. Some women are not able to make that choice, but for many, it is a choice. And we need to find a way of being inclusive of that phenomenon. Thank you.
So just, Sudeshna, just to complete on I think it bears repeating. It's very cliched and it's an understanding that I think we will all share. But for the purposes of a panel, it would be left entirely incomplete to not say simply, very categorically, that the mainstream media only presents others as others. It boxes people into categories. If Mukta is on a show, she is expected to only speak as a Chakma, even if she chooses in that moment to say, hey, I've got an opinion on education. I've got an opinion on where Bangladesh is headed as a country, but she is going to be blocked. She is going to be put in a box, just as Huda is going to be put into a box and be told, look, lady, Musawa, all great, but you know what? You stick to speaking on Muslim issues. You do not have a take on where the great United Kingdom is headed as a nation, because that is the role that people are expected to play. Look, mainstream media, and let's talk about television media, which is the far bigger culprit, because we're really living in an age of visual communication. And so television media, it gets the eyeballs, and what it constructs night after night, certainly in India, and I expect in many other parts of the world, is a nightly gladiator show where you are expected in a public arena. What were the great gladiators and the Colosseum? So you have the television Colosseum, you've got the gladiators, and you are expected to have a public brawl for the entertainment of the mainstream public. That's what television, journalism, and on what ought to be issues of importance, of equality, of rights, of spaces, and what are the rights that people are asking for. You're talking about, I am an equal shareholder in this nation. I deserve the same education and the same income and not to be discriminated at in a hospital, and the right to walk a street without being called racist names or Islamophobic names. The ask is fairly simple. The television programming is designed not to give any space to those legitimate asks. It only seeks to further closet you, cookie cutter you, box you into a singular identity that you are seen to represent. And it is, if you recall how Mukta started her introduction and why she wanted to be on this panel, she was objecting to a very instrumental use of her name and her voice on a panel that otherwise throughout the year does not respect the range of issues that she works on, right? So it is checking a box. Hey, I've got a debate on, let me get one Muslim woman, let me get one Chakma woman, let me get one so-and-so, and let me box each of them into taking a position only. So what mainstream media tries to do is create a gladiator spectacle. I think we really need to find new ways of having public conversations, because the point is the public nature of these conversations are also important, but not in the structured manner in which these present battles are happening. And to retain the right, look, to have the right to fight for one's identity or a community or a position or an organization is legitimate, but equally to not be always in perpetuity at all moments of your life to be reduced to that singular identity. I mean, I think that is a challenge, because we're all women here as well. We're all located and belong to different countries as well. Some of us are mothers as well. And we are all of those things, and we care deeply about justice in a million different ways as well. So I resist, and I think all of us need to hold on to what we're battling for, but equally to hold on to your right to speak about anything on earth, and not only to be called to television studios as a bearer of one narrow identity. I think that is something that we need to battle as well. Yeah.
I just want to add with Farah's point that it's either, well, the religion in Bangladeshi context, religion plays role either when it's a celebration is happening, you know, like Durga Puja is happening. At that time, you will suddenly see in the media so many Hindu women's faces. Or if it's a destruction. So if hundreds of Hindu women are, you know, their families are getting, their villages are getting burned, then suddenly it will become the media news. Otherwise, you can't see so many narratives of the minority religions, women in the national media. Even if the same case happened to a majority religion, which is Muslim in Bangladesh, and then a Hindu women, the same case happening, maybe in the same area in the University of Dhaka, you will see that the Muslim women's news is highlighted in the paper, and the Hindu women's news even didn't make the spot, you know, not even in the 5th page of the newspaper. So these are the things, like how sort of like you have to fall under the celebration, which is very much day basis, or you have to suffer enough to be in the news. You have to be killed, raped brutally. That's also not like just rape, you know, you won't be eligible enough to be in the media. It have to be very, very brutal, graphic, violent, then you can make the page. Yeah. So that is very problematic, I find. And the other thing I wanted to say that, see, there is no problem if you are observing a day and trying to make an inclusive panel and then trying to hear all the voices or the thoughts or opinion. No problem. The problem becomes when you are using these women of different identity as a signboard of being inclusive. Because how many times we have been attending all these webinar discussions, seminars and stuff. What happens next? Like, I have been in the women's rights movement for more than 18 years. I'm saying the same thing again and again for 18 years. What happens? What will happen after this webinar? You know? So that's also one thing. Like I mean, by you, I'm not saying this panel's organizer only, I'm saying overall. You know, you are just trying to be inclusive and show that, ooh, we included all, we are diversified and everything. But what happens next? That's my question.
While you all were speaking, the only thing that I could do was nod my head and think, I agree, I have gone through this. I know of this, I have heard this. Something that Farah said, yes.
Sorry, in the spirit of a discussion, you know, something Mukta, she just said, that it's got to be violent and it's got to be rape and it's got to be all of this to get the eyeballs, right? To get, if you're a minority, to get what, you know, what the power of mainstream media does, and in fact is is a certain kind of selective invisibilization, right? Selective silence. What that does is it forces a minority or a group that is not necessarily part of the mainstream to constantly have to project victimhood in order to get the eyeballs. And then you have all the liberals running behind them saying, now we want to save you because, oh, you poor thing. So they demand victimhood from you in order to even give you a place in the public square. And in the same breath, then it becomes a kind of a liberal agenda to save the victims. So it's a very vicious kind of a narrative cycle that we need to, in order to break it, we need to first be aware of it and speak it out loud in many forums to say that this is what is happening, is that I'm not getting my share of national airtime unless I've got a victim story to tell. Yeah. And so you perpetually want me to project my story in victim frames, and you use that then to build a larger narrative denying me agency. So it is a very complex narrative game that is played, and that we need to recognize and be smart enough to catch it, and to break it, therefore. Yeah.
If I just put in my two thoughts, it's religion and patriarchy go hand in hand. There's no doubt about that. But the so-called liberal feminists or the neoliberals, they would, if we talk about the recent attacks that have happened in Bangladesh last year during Durga Puja, something I think Mukta was referring to a bit, is that when there was an outbreak in the media covering the news, and people were rushing to protest what is happening, but then again started the conversation that that how Durga Puja might be regressive, how a priest celebrating puja might be regressive, how Hindu women putting on shidur or sindur is regressive, and how Hindu women are not even aware of it, and they have been conditioned to wear sindur. So for taking the narrative out of what is happening to people, to stopping them from identifying or stopping them from being different, is, I also feel, the biggest identity politics right now. Like making people by making people look the same, but we can't really do that, right? Like everyone is different in their own sphere. I don't know if I'm making sense much, but
you are. I think if I may interject, and I build on everything that you have said, I think at the heart of this is the having to prove your humanity again and again. Because if you were human enough, people would pay attention to what's happening to you. If you were human enough, you wouldn't have to go to the lengths of victimhood to be utterly broken, to be put back together. So, that's one of the things that patriarchy does, and when it combined with this kind of the tyranny of the majority, in which where you have to your identity is erased until you become until you are so broken that they can only recognize you once you are savable, and you're only worthy of existence, and your humanity is only worthy of being recognized once you are savable by them, because you're reinforcing their narrative of like the savior. But also one thing that you mentioned Sudeshna, was the kind of idea of the deflection from the kind of the atrocities that were happening to kind of the focus on to, oh, well, is it the religion that's regressive? It's the men, isn't it? It's not. So I think, and that's again, another tactic that we really must be aware of. White supremacy, rather patriarchy as well, what they do is that these systems of oppression, once they pay lip service to social justice and equality, but only up to an extent. And because then what you need to do is tick the box and say, yes, I've got that number of many speakers that are women in my panel. I've covered this issue about this minority. I can move on now and carry on, because the interest is not to change the system and dismantle the structure, is to maintain it. How do you maintain it? By being popular and giving the masses, as you know, as Farah said, the gladiator circle, you know, the Colosseum, give people what they want, give them some kind of fodder, let them have their show, and let's move on to the next story. Because if we allow people to really think about what's happening, to really absorb what's going on, to create space for change and to protest, that means that we are potentially in the firing line as a system. And we don't want that. We want to maintain our way of working. It serves us. And I feel that's important for us to recognize, is these ideas, these tactics that maintain this kind of patriarchal oppression, is the victimhood narrative, is the erasure, is the deflection and whataboutery. And I think these are very important.
We're almost at the end, and I do want to end this panel with something to look forward to, how we can move forward with this conversation and ahead with all that we want to dismantle. If I'd put it out there as clearly as possible, what would you like to change about this conversation? And how can the media, the mainstream media, represent us better today?
I'm happy to go ahead just to give a suggestion. I would like this conversation to really move to listing our amazing kind of efforts together and in solidarity with each other to prove how much that we are doing and all the things that we are changing. I think that's one issue. I also feel that one thing that we are doing in terms of what the media, what we can do to make sure the media reflects our stories, our lived reality, is to put more support behind feminists in the media. So one of the things that the Musawa is doing is creating like a support network and cultivating a network of support and solidarity with journalists, feminist journalists, who want to cover issues that are relevant to women and who are showcase the lived realities of women, away from kind of this narrative of like, you know, the kind of the woman being saved, or that the woman is fighting another woman or having to prove her humanity or her credibility, and moving away from this kind of very kind of hyper masculine view of needing to have an argument and this verbal gladiator game that Farah talked about. I think that's where I think we should be focusing our efforts in terms of the media. How do we make the media more feminist, I guess, and inclusive in all its forms, whether it's kind of your traditional media or your social kind of media work. And there's lots to be hopeful about. This is an amazing space that has been created. I'm, you know, just heartened by the conversations that I've had with my sisters today, and the fact that they are existing despite all the oppression and all the harm that they have to deal with every day. Each one of you gets up and does it again. And that's one of the key ways of knowing that we are kind of making a difference, is that our voices are not extinguished. And I look really forward to future work and partnerships with and solidarity, to act in solidarity with all of you. And another thing that we are doing at Musawa is working across religions and secular women's advocates to create changes in laws from different kind of traditions that center the needs of women, regardless of which faith they belong to. We want change as women who see our value and our worth and who are completely anti-oppression. We want to work together for our sisters, because once all our chains are free, then we are truly liberated. So I'm really looking forward to the future. There's so much to do and much to celebrate, I think.
Let me add, sorry, Putushi, were you speaking? Sorry, I'll back off. Yeah. Go ahead.
You sure? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I think I have three recommendations. One is the media needs to act like they are very good journalists when it comes to cover the religious minorities news. Yeah, they publish anything. They even publish somebody's status, having information from somebody's Facebook or Twitter. Suddenly, when they need to cover the religious minorities, they have to check all the things thousands times. So stop acting these two different ways. This is very hypocritical. So that is one thing I will suggest. Number two, I will suggest that I think today's panel was very much on religion and how it's being portrayed in the media, but who are defining this religion, that is very important. So like Musawa or like Farah, who are working on the religion that is so-called oppressive. We say that, oh, they are very oppressive. We need to bring out all these narratives, like what actually Islam says, what actually Buddhism or Hinduism says, and who did the interpretation, in what era, for what's the background history, how this interpretation come, all these things needs to come out. So that will be my second recommendation. If we can have a database or I don't know, website or something where we can go and find out materials and on women and religion, that would be nice. The third one, I will say that stop saving, protecting women unless they are asking you. Don't just jump into save and protect women based on your understanding who is good women and who is bad women. Stop doing it. Let us choose what we want to wear. Let us choose what religion we want to follow. Let us choose what we want to eat, how we want to say our story. Just back off. That will be my third recommendation. Thank you, Sudeshna. And thank you, Farah, for giving me the floor.
Not at all. So, Sudeshna, your question was, how do we make sure that they represent us? And, my first response would be, we need to be them. In other words, this us and them, the whole binary, the whole narrative, the othering, that all of us, all four of us, need to man those television channels and run those television programs. And just your very existence over there does not mean that you have to necessarily cover women's stories or Chakmas or Musawa or Farah's work in Delhi. It means our presence itself, that there is a power to representation. And I think that is a space that needs to be fought for and to be embraced and to be really taken. And diversity is an idea that has been reduced to an instrumental charade, right? Diversity is a word that actually was a pluralism, diversity. These are beautiful words that almost all major democracies in the world have reduced to a charade and reduced to being, check a box, get one woman from here, get one woman from there, check a box, get a brown man, get a black man, get a white man, check a box. It's been And what those of us who care passionately about real plurality and diversity need to do is keep a watch. And look, and much as I hate, the cancel culture and the calling out culture within movements, and it is one of the most disempowering things that people do to each other, feminists do to each other, women in the people in the NGO sector do, and they're constantly calling out imperfect positions, and who is the perfect position taker on minority rights or on feminism, on her position is so while we need to stop doing that within progressive movements, we need to up the energy in doing that as watchdogs of mainstream media. I don't think that mainstream media needs to be let off the hook for one solitary second, and there simply are not enough people, eyes and ears, doing that. We need to be calling out misrepresentation. We need to be doing fact checking. We need to tell them loudly when they tell lies about me or about her or about any community, or because this affects not only the honesty of public portrayal, it affects eventually access to justice and right to life. It means people are falsely incarcerated because there has been false information in the media. It means people will never get free from prison because there's false. And I think we need to be very active in calling that out. But look, on the point of religion, I understand. I actually have, I don't necessarily agree with Islamophobia as a phrase. And I'll tell you why. Because the hatred, the demonization, the discrimination, the violence is not only against those who believe in Islam as a religion. It is actually about anybody, believer or non-believer, who is seen to bear a Muslim identity. Yeah. So it is not about the tenets of Islam that that a right-wing majoritarian media is interrogating. What they are interrogating and attacking is anybody who is seen to be a bearer of a Muslim identity. And I think we need to make that distinction, is that the only inquiry need not only be into what is a feminist interpretation of Islam. And I think that that is very necessary. But I equally believe that we need to understand that the battle lines are not about believers and non-believers and about those who subscribe to the Islamic faith. And it is about othering. It is about honestly, in India, if there weren't 200 million Muslims, they would have had to construct another other, because it is against that constructed other that they are seeking to consolidate a Hindu majority. And so I think the politics of this needs to be understood, and that we cannot unravel the politics of the global attack on Muslims only by seeking recourse to Islam as a religion. We have to do that, but we have to do a lot more to actually untangle that these are political actions. These people don't actually engage with or particularly care about what are the core teachings of Islam as a religion. They care about the construction of people as Muslims and the ability to consolidate their own power against this constructed other. So I think that that is an understanding that I have and would like to share and discuss at some future date. Yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone for being here, for sharing your views. And I'm just glad that I got to be a part of this conversation, just to hear you three speak. You all are so eloquent. I can't even believe that I got to moderate a panel that has you three. So thank you so much for being here and agreeing to do this.